could feel my heart rate double and couldn't produce an answer. While I was not particularly knowledgeable about post-Soviet countries, I knew that prison was just a fancier word for labor camps in those parts. I realized that regardless of how amiable the major had been up to that point, he still had the Soviet mentality deeply ingrained within his mind. I suddenly became his prize, an enemy of the state that he could parade as a trophy to his superiors. I spent a good amount of time trying to convince Volodin to overlook my trespass, but that didn't stop him from reporting what took place to someone who was presumably his superior. I overheard the conversation he had over the radio, and found out he was supposed to escort me outside of the exclusion zone the following day when the train would come again. After that, he was ordered to hand me to the military. As a last resort, as desperate and idiotic as it was, I tried using my American citizenship as an argument, but he wouldn't budge. Everything seemed to fall apart, and I knew that once he was no longer the only one who knew what happened, I was doomed. I decided to not let emotions get the best of me and give Volodin one more victory, so I started hatching a plan in order to at least try to escape. "At least I hope you're going to let me use the toilet," I said after a long silence. Volodin nodded and helped me get out of the chair. He pushed me towards the bathroom door as I was walking too slow in his eyes. Once in front of the door, I pointed towards my handcuffs and Volodin gave me a skeptical gaze. "How am I going to use the toilet with these on my hands, goddammit?" "You have a handgun. Do you really think I'd try something now?" I asked resentfully. He complied, and, probably believing I was too crippled to pose any threat, he unlocked my handcuffs, opened the door, and took his gun out. I entered the bathroom and heard the door close behind me. The bathroom was dimly lit, like the other rooms, and was as rudimentary as it could get: a toilet, a sink, and a simple shower. There were no objects I could use to fight back in any way against Volodin, but I could not help but notice that the sink looked quite frail. The boots I was wearing were quite sturdy, so I took one out and struck the sink with full force, shattering it. I then proceeded to lie down on the ground with my face against the floor. The major immediately opened the door, and I could feel him stare inside the bathroom for a few moments. I then heard him put his handgun on the floor as he was bending down. He put his hands on my back and started turning me over on the other side so that I would be facing the ceiling, putting me in a perfect position to strike. I threw a quick punch with my left hand, hitting him in the side of his skull and projecting his head in what was left of the broken sink. He hit the ground, and I used the opportunity to get back on my feet. Volodin was lying motionless, and I touched him with the tip of my foot to make sure he was knocked out. I then proceeded to check his pockets, taking out every key I could find. Then I took the belt that his gun and holster were attached to. I spent a few more moments staring at the major and eventually burst into laughter, surprised by the fact that he hadn't anticipated my move. I was shocked that the very first reaction I had after potentially killing someone was to laugh, but I quickly realized that he might still wake up and that I could not waste time questioning my own morality. I left the bathroom and locked the door. I then struggled for a few good minutes to push a cabinet and the couch in front of the door in order to block it. Once I knew that the room was secured, I let myself fall on the floor, panting, as my body was still not working properly due to the hit it received. I stared at the ceiling and at the dusty light bulb that was coming out of it, contemplating my next move. I knew no way to get out of the city, and even if I could somehow find a way out, I'd be stopped by the wall surrounding it, where I'd get apprehended. My only option was to head back to the apartment that belonged to my grandfather and seek more answers. I lay down for a few more minutes until I could gather enough strength to head to the garage. I found Volodin's jeep, turned the engine on, and slowly cruised out of the building. It was already dark outside, but I still had a vague recollection of the way we had went the first time we visited the apartment, and to my luck, every block has its number painted on the side. Despite of the decay, the number could still be deciphered on most of the buildings, so I started driving through countless deserted alleyways. Almost no silhouettes could be seen on the streets, but I could have sworn I'd see one looking through a window of an apartment every now and then. Strangely, they seemed to still follow the day-night cycle. After a good hour of slowly driving through decaying streets and avoiding rubble or rusted car bodies, I finally found the building I was looking for. I left the car and slowly went up the stairs and down the hallway until I found the apartment. I entered, took a long look around to see if I was at the right place, and the silhouette appeared again. "You're back," she said, and sketched what I presumed was a smile. "I assume the man that came after you, is he no longer a threat?" "I don't want to talk about it. I want to hear the rest. You said you needed help." "Right. You do remember what I told you about the wall and the system of transmitters on it, right?" she asked, and I nodded. "The only way we can get out of here and find peace is if that transmitter stops working. When you leave this place and go back home, you have to tell the world what is going on in here." She spoke, and for the first time I heard her voice become shaky. I was compelled by the situation to explain what happened with Major Volodin, and that I didn't have the slightest idea about how I could get out of the city, let alone the country. I was also skeptical that any sane person would believe me enough to even investigate what was going on in there. She looked disappointed, but seemed to understand my point. I realized how naive I had been to expect a solution for my problem, since if there was any way out, she and the rest of the city's inhabitants would have used it already. I started walking in circles around the living room, trying to put my thoughts in order, when I suddenly remembered the part I'd seen from the wall when entering the city. The parts that were presumably the transmitters seemed to be interconnected. Wait a second. Those transmitters, they're tied to each other, aren't they? I never really understood much when it came to technology, but I saw a lot of wiring and cables going through the transmitters, she replied. I realized that there was a good chance that taking down just a small portion of the wall would essentially render the entire mechanism useless. I started getting excited to the point that I could barely feel the pain in my body anymore. However, just as I was about to victoriously talk about how I found a solution, I realized that there was no way I could bring down an entire chunk of a thick wall that was probably more than 40 feet tall. "Is there something wrong with you?" "I need to find a way to make a hole in that wall. A big one, too." I realized I spoke without thinking, and Maria became restless, telling me that it was impossible, and if I were to attempt such an ordeal, it would most likely be a suicide mission. She started complaining to herself that she shouldn't have asked for my help, and that she never meant to ask me to put myself at such a risk. What she kept failing to understand was that my fate was already sealed for the most part. If I were to remain in the city, I would have been dead within 2 weeks, either due to starvation or radiation poisoning. If I decided to leave, the military would have arrested me and sent me to a labor camp where I would be dead in less than 2 years. I've dug my own grave, and there is nothing either of us can do to change that. However, there has to be a way to disrupt the transmitters. "Officer, your handler, is he still alive?" "I don't know. He may be alive, but I hit him in the head pretty bad. I've locked him in a room at the small base that's still active in the city." "Well, he's an officer. He must have access to things that could help you, right?" My excitement flared up again following her question. I remember the small military base the train had went past when entering the city. The image of the cannon barrel sticking out was quite clear in my mind. It was an insane thought, but if there was a single way to cause enough damage to tear down a big chunk of the wall, it was by using one of those vehicles. I thanked Maria for giving me the idea, and I started rushing towards the door, to her shock. She tried to make me stop, almost begging me to stay for a few more moments, but I could not be stopped. I was still lightheaded and almost fell on the stairs several times when going down, but I had to know whether Volodin was still alive or not. I rushed to the car as soon as I exited the building and floored the acceleration pedal. I raced through the streets back to the base, barely avoiding huge piles of rubble at times. I jumped out of the jeep as soon as I was in front of the building and kept the engine running. As soon as I went through the base's entrance, I could hear a noise coming from the bathroom and realized that Volodin was trying to break open the door. I let a sigh of relief, knowing that he hadn't died and that there was still a chance of the plan being carried out. I went for the door that led inside the bathroom and stared at it for a few moments, seeing how it trembled slightly each time the Major would hit it violently. I slowly moved the cabinet and couch out of the way, and nothing was blocking the door anymore. Since it was an old wooden door, I decided I'd let Volodin break it instead of risking to open it myself. I drew the Major's gun out of the holster and distanced myself from the door, so that he can't try to disarm me once he escapes. A few more blows later, he managed to kick down the door, now that it was no longer blocked. Volodin took a quick glance at the living room and froze when he noticed me with a gun pointed towards him. "Stay right where you are." "What now? You're going to shoot me?" "Not if you behave." "Whatever you want me to do, it's not happening." I decided to not tell him what I wanted right from the start, but rather decided to tell him to take the cuffs that he had used on me from the ground and cuff himself. I told him to sit on the couch, and he complied. I took a glass out of a cabinet while still pointing the gun at him and carefully poured some vodka from another bottle I'd found. I took the glass and handed it to him from a distance, and he looked at me blazed. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Have a drink, it'll help with a headache," I said, and he eventually took the glass. The Major started sipping from the glass, but remained silent and kept staring in my eyes as if he wanted to tell me that I would not be able to convince him to do anything he wouldn't want to. In spite of that, I decided to fill him in and describe in detail what had happened after I knocked him out in the bathroom. As much as he tried to keep a sober and defying expression, he did seem to adopt a more amiable gaze as I was getting closer to the end of my speech. "I'm going to need you to help me infiltrate in that base. There is only one way to stop the transmission." "You can continue waving that gun at me all you want. Shoot me if you have to. I have 2, maybe 3 more years to live. Radiation has been killing me slowly and surely. I have nothing to lose, and I will not betray my country for a stupid American tourist." I'm sorry to hear that. But Major, isn't that more of a reason to set those people free? I continued, despite being taken by surprise by Volodin's situation. "I knew it was a mistake, accepting to escort you here," he replied and sighed. "I should have never returned to this place." "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I don't exactly intend to die in a Severovian labor camp either." "You don't get it. My father worked here when the accident happened. He's one of them now," he replied, moving his gaze away from me and for the first time in minutes. "Why do you think I left the train car when we entered the city?" Volodin's confession brought me a glimmer of hope, knowing that he potentially had a personal reason to help me. There was a reason the silhouette of the old man in the truck looked familiar, but only then I realized it must have been his father. However, the Major later disclosed that his father had been an abusive alcoholic who, in the Major's eyes, deserved to never find peace for what he had done. Much as the Major attempted to adopt a sober and mature personality, he couldn't hide that he was still haunted by his past in the end. "I served my country until the end. I'm not a traitor, and that's all I'm going to say," he spoke with a now shaky voice and concluded his monologue. "Major, what does serving your country mean to you?" "Something you Americans will probably never understand," he replied resentfully, looking almost disgusted by the question. I continued staring at him, forcing him to continue. "It means taking care of its people, goddammit," he thundered, when he realized his first answer wasn't enough. "And the tens of thousands who are stuck here until the end of time, for all we know, are they less Severovian to you?" I replied, raising my voice. "They're not people, they're... The Major stopped talking as if he walked into a wall. He started staring at one of the walls, but his eyes were clearly telling that something bigger was going on in his mind. As tempted I was to further press Volodin with my discourse, I decided to give him a moment of respite. Damn it. I never thought of it that way. Or perhaps, better said, I didn't want to. I never found a way to forget what my father did to me. He started speaking again, and I noticed small tears at the corners of his eyes. But could you find a way to forgive? He spent a few more moments in his contemplation and lifted his eyes towards me. You have to know that it's very likely that this is a suicide mission. I can figure as much. I lowered my gun and put it back into the holster. I reluctantly grabbed the key to the handcuffs from my pocket and unlocked them. For a moment, I expected to be pushed to the ground as a final step to the Major's cunning plan to manipulate me into setting him free, but he started walking towards the bedroom. I followed him and noticed he was taking out a military uniform out of a wardrobe. You're going to need this if we are to infiltrate the base. You're lucky I have a spare uniform. I hope it fits. I was probably at least a size bigger than the Major, but after a few minutes of struggle I managed to make the uniform fit, although it was extremely uncomfortable. We headed back to the living room and both of us took a seat on the couch. The Major then explained that since the military base was small, there was rarely any high-ranking official around, and that they'd come only now and then for inspections. His authority was significant enough for us to be able to go through the guard posts without too much problems. As for myself, I became Lieutenant Pyotr Ivanov, and I was supposed to pretend I am his aide. We were supposed to go through security and head directly for the courtyard, where we would commandeer a military vehicle with the capacity of inflicting enough damage. My military experience, my work with motorized artillery was limited, but I could still remember the basics. Everything had to be done under the guise of an unannounced vehicle technical capability inspection, which according to Volodin was a common practice in the area. Since Severovaya was always combat-ready, as it did not have the best relationship with most of its neighboring countries, he told me it would not raise much suspicion. The Major used the radio again to inform his superior that he'd be leaving the city earlier, using his jeep. He reassured him that he had me in custody and that he's able to escort me by himself to the nearest town.